Welcome, everyone. This is very special, very exciting. I'm so glad that we get to start, God willing, another Masechta together after just finishing Makos. After basically an entire year, we are ready. Not even a week delayed, jumping right into our next Masechta, into Maseches Megillah. It's a little bit longer than Makos. Makos was 24 blot. This is, I think, 32, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, 32. Actually, the last one is only one amud, so don't worry. It's not that bad after all. And this is going to be different than Makos. I mean, it should be a little bit obvious that it's different than Makos in the sense that they're both in two different Sidarim. Makos was an Ezekiel topic. I thought that we would do that because, we in Mishnayos right now, we're going through Moed, so I thought we'd switch it up and we do something in Seder and Ezekiel, deal with torts, damages. But I could imagine some of us were probably saying to ourselves during this time, the legal disputation analysis is fascinating, but what am I supposed to do with all these laws about getting lashes and makos? What does that mean for me nowadays? And we talked about the ethical import, the values, how we hope the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, and I guess we hope we'll get lashes one day. But what we're going to find in Megillah is two things different. Number one, the halachos we are dealing with will be more relevant. Not every halach we learn is going to have necessarily a direct application today, but as you'll see in just a moment, we're dealing with Hilchos Purim, which, by the way, Purim is not that long from now. I mean, there's Tu B'Shvat coming up, but the next major holiday is Purim. So this is, first of all, a great preparation for that. Secondly, Megillah is a little bit famous for its agadatas. It has a lot of special agadatas, elaborates on the story of Purim, and lots of other fascinating tidbits that you may have heard in the sermon come from Maseches Megillah. So let me just actually read for you. I thought it was very, very helpful, this succinct summary that you find in the Masifta Gemara. I'll read it to you and translate, and then we'll jump into the first Mishnah. And again, like the rule usually goes, when something is very long and big, chances are it's counterintuitively less complicated. So sort of applies here. The principles are very limited, but we have to hold cup, as they say. So here's the intro. There are three fundamental principles that our Masechta Megillah will address. Number one, Biprate dine kriyas ha-Megillah, the details of reading the Megillah, Bizman ha-Kriya, the time of reading it, Ba'ofen ha-Kriya, the manner in which it is read, Umihim chayavim b'kriyasa, and who is chayiv, who's obligated to listen to Megillah, or to read Megillah. That's what we're going to find in the first and second parak of this Masechta. Item number two, we're going to branch out and talk about B'dinei Kriyas HaTorah, V'hav Torah B'Shabbasu B'Chagim, B'Shar Zmani HaKriya. We're going to talk about the general laws of Torah reading, the general laws of the Haftorah. Where do these come from? What are their parameters? So we're not just going to talk about the Megillah. You might think to yourself, why do you spend a whole year learning about the laws of Megillah and Purim? It only comes once a year. But actually, aside from the fact that it's still important anyway, Torah's Torah, we're actually going to be learning about the general laws of Torah reading, which is relevant at least every 3 days. And then also we'll also talk about who can get an aliyah to read from the Torah, who can lead davening, that's very important, who's eligible to lead davening in shul, and the laws of Birchas Kohanim, of Duchenim. Then finally, the third item is Yisparba and Yonei Kedushas Fatei Knesios Ubeiz Open Mutter L'Horidim Kedushasam. Then we'll talk about the general laws of the sanctity of the Beis HaKnesses, of the shul, and laws about selling, or God forbid, having to destroy a shul, perhaps to build a better one. So those are the topics that will be the general gist of what we'll be discussing in Megillah. But again, while those are the general halachic topics, which I think is really relevant and really great for us to know about, I'll try and include halacha l'maisa when relevant. Also, there'll be some really great agaritas coming along. So that's what we have to look forward to. I hope you are as excited as I am. Let's begin our journey now. Megillah Nikres b'Yud Aleph, b'Yud Beis, b'Yud Gimel, b'Yud Daled, b'Tesvav. The Megillah could possibly be read on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, or 15th of Adar, lo pachos lo yoser, but it's never earlier than the 11th and never later than the 15th. In general, Krachin Hamukafin Choma Mimos Yeshua ben Nun, special cities that were walled cities from the times of Yoshua ben Nun, Korim b'Tesvav, they read on the 15th. Kfarim v'Yaros Gedolos Korin b'Yud Daled, whereas regular cities that weren't walled from the times of Yeshua, or just standard suburbs and villages, they read on the 14th. Ella shakfarim magdim liyom haknisa. But you should bear in mind that the way the dynamic worked is that the villagers would come in on Mondays and Thursdays to town. Why would they come in on Mondays and Thursdays? Because Ezra instituted that Beis Din should convene in the cities on Mondays and Thursdays. Mondays and Thursdays, you can tell, is a very significant day. That's when the public Torah reading takes place as well. So it would be too much trouble to ask them to come in on those days and then also to come back for Megillah reading. Let's say I came in on Monday and then I have to come back in on Tuesday. You're basically, by the time you get home, you're traveling back to Jerusalem, not Jerusalem, you're traveling back to whatever the city is. Now, the question you might ask is, why is it that unlike everywhere else that has the 14th, why is it that walled cities read on the 15th? The reasoning is because of Shushan, where the story took place. And to mimic what Shushan had, their additional day, the walled cities, to pay respect to Shushan, also read on the 15th. That's one explanation for it. By the way, I know there's going to be a lot of fun agaritas in this Masechta, but you'll pardon the expression. It's almost like the Gemara wants to separate the boys from the men and wants to hit us up with a very technical first amud of Gemara just to see if we're really serious about this and we can hang on tight for all the goodies that it has in store. So don't say I didn't warn you. Ketzad. So when do we have this idea of moving things up? It's possible sometimes that we have to move from the 14th, reading on the 14th, to reading on the 13th, reading on the 12th, and reading on the 11th in order to accommodate villages so that when villagers go into the city, they could, if you have a small village, you don't have many Balei Kriya. You don't have many people that can read from the Torah. So, it's like this morning at 7:30, our one guy who knows how to lane was out. So I had to be the guy who laned. Well, our issue, I guess, is not having too few laners. It's too few people showing up to minyan. But okay, that's another point. Ketzad. Let's say the 14th fell out on Monday. The villages would read on the 14th. Perfect, on the Monday. And those that are walled cities, they would read the next day as prescribed on the 15th. Very basic case. That's the rule. What's the exception? Here we go. Let's say the 14th fell out on Tuesday or Wednesday. Remember, Tuesday or Wednesday is not a Yom Kinisa. Just think about when Torah is read. It's not a Torah reading day. So what do? Now we can apply the principle that we just learned. Kvar magdim liyom kinisa, vayoros gedolos korbo bayom, v'kofos choma lemachar. So here's what happens. The villages will actually go a day early. They will hear reading on the 13th, which is on Monday when they're in the city. The standard non-walled cities, they will read on the proper day, on Tuesday or Wednesday, on the 14th because they are the cities. They have the Balei Kriya. They can afford to read on the 14th. And as in general, as prescribed, the walled cities always read the next day. So they would read, if the 14th is on Tuesday, then they're reading on Wednesday because they read on the 15th. We're going through the whole week, every scenario. Let's say the 14th of Adar fell out on Thursday. So then, perfect. Another standard case, just like the Monday case. Great, everyone gets to read in their proper time. The villagers and regular city goers, regular city citizens, they read on the 14th, which is Thursday. And the walled cities read the next day on Friday. Next case, Chalios Erev Shabbos. Let's say it falls out on the 14th, falls out on Erev Shabbos on Friday. So then, Makdimim Liyom HaKnisa, for Makdimim Liyom HaKnisa, the villagers get to hear it read on Thursday, one day earlier. And the regular cities lane on Friday. And what's the chiddush here? What's novel about this? Mukavos Choma, even the walled cities, Koren Bo Bayom, they too will also read on Friday, not on Shabbos. Wait, they're supposed to hear on the 15th. The Shabbos is the 15th in this case. Why can't we lay Megillah on Shabbos? We lay lots of things on Shabbos. We have Kriyas Torah on Shabbos. We have Haftarah on Shabbos. Why did Chazal not want us to read Megillah on Shabbos? So if you look in Rashi, to the right, a little bit up, Rashi says, because we're concerned about being over the Isser of Hotzah, of carrying the Megillah to Shul with no Erev. So let me ask you, according to that logic, we should never be reading Torah on Shabbos either, because someone might have to carry a Torah to the shul. We don't have a Torah there. It's at someone's house, and we should be concerned that someone's going to carry in a Rosh Hashanah, someone's going to carry through a public domain, be over the Isser Votzah. So what's there between Megillah and Torah? This is for another shiur, but the easiest conceptualization is that the reading of Torah in shul is a public obligation, a chovas at tzibor. The reading of Megillah, while we have an idea of Pesumei Nisa, publicizing the miracle, it's actually an individual obligation. It's a chovas hayachid. And so for something that's only an individual obligation, it's outweighed by the concern for violating the prohibition of carrying on Shabbos. Whereas something that is a public obligation, that would supersede the concern for possibly carrying it through a public domain on Shabbos. And okay, great.
Well, aren't there other mitzvahs of Purim which
yes,
would be also on Shabbos?
There are other mitzvahs of Purim, but we're choosing to establish a day. Which day are we going to mark as Purim?
No, you talked about Shabbos.
Oh, so you know what's interesting, actually? You know what comes up? There is this scenario, actually, that you're talking about. In Israel, you have this in the walled cities, where Purim is on Friday. So certain mitzvos will be on Shabbos, certain mitzvos will be not on Shabbos. So actually, we had it this past year, if I'm not mistaken. And it's very complicated. I don't remember exactly which mitzvos got put on Friday, on Shabbos, and on Sunday, but there's this whole complicated way of splitting it up, and that's absolutely correct, Erwin. We don't have to deal with that here, where we're living in Stanford, but I think this past year in Israel, they had to deal with that. You're right. So maybe other mitzvos should be able to be done on Shabbos. Giving matanos is difficult because you're not supposed to give a gift on Shabbos. You guys know we have a bas mitzvah this Shabbos. So when Rabbi Cohen gives a gift to a bar or bas mitzvah child, I would presume what he does, this is taking us a little bit off track, but since one is not supposed to do business on Shabbos and giving a gift is within that category, what you can do is before Shabbos, I would hand something to Marissa, and I would say, Marissa, what you're doing is called Zachin La'adam Shelo B'fanav. you are accepting the gift on the behalf of that bar mitzvah boy, and that bar mitzvah boy didn't even appoint Marissa to accept the Tanakh. I don't even know what we give bar mitzvah boys here. What do we give bar mitzvah boys?
Books.
Books. Okay, book. Yeah, smart. Okay, good.
Siddur
We give a
Ring.
sefer. We give a Kiva Eger or something. So that way, once it's Shabbos already, unbeknownst to the child who doesn't even know what Zachan Adam Shal B'Panav is, he has already acquired the bar mitzvah gift. So it's only I'm physically giving it to the child on Shabbos, but I'm not bequeathing it to him halachically. So that's actually something that many people do to avoid the problem. Another way around it is I'm giving it to you, but I'm still the owner right now. Take care of it for me until after Shabbos. There's different ways to circumvent it. How did we get into that? How did we get into that? I don't even know. But good stuff, right? Okay. The imtomer ya'achar mekavan ad acher Shabbos havali tezayin v'merkrav v'lo yavor. Now I would say, wait. If I can't lane on Shabbos, why don't I just push it off to Sunday? Why don't I push it off to the 16th? Why am I pushing it earlier to the 14th? The answer is, it says in the pasuk, "V'lo yavor," you shall not pass. And therefore, we know that we can never exceed the 15th day. Therefore, we go a day early to the 14th day for the wall, even for the walled cities. That was when it falls out on Shabbos. Final case in the Mishnah, Chalios Acher HaShabbos. Let's say it falls out on Sunday. The 14th is on Sunday. Kfar Magdim Liyom HaKnisa. The villages go all the way back to Thursday is when they hear the reading, which, by the way, you ever wonder how we can push it as early as the 11th day? This is that scenario. From Sunday to Thursday, I believe, brings you back to 11. Someone could correct me if my math is wrong, but that's what Rashi says, the Havale Yud Aleph. And the Kfarim Makdinim Liyom HaKnisa by Yeroskos Korbo Bayom. And the cities will read on Sunday, which is the 14th. And the walled cities will read on the 15th. So basically, the Mishnah kind of just did us a favor and spelled out for us all the permutations. But here's the general principle that you got to take away. The reading for the Megillah in general is on the 14th, except for walled cities from times of Yeshua, their reading is on the 15th to pay tribute to the city of Shushan, which had a miracle Lent, an extra day. Now, the exception is that villages that don't have their own laner and rely on the cities, we don't expect them to come in more than Monday and Thursday, to commute even more than that. So we were lenient and we allow them to basically hear laning earlier on the 11th, the 12th, or the 13th, depending on how it played out. Sometimes that'd be Monday, sometimes that'd be Thursday. And the one other interesting tidbit we see in the Mishnah is that if the 15th falls out on Shabbos, rather than pushing the reading off to the 16th for the walled cities, we actually go a day earlier because Lo Yavor, as the Mishnah said in the first line, 11 through the 15th. No earlier, no later. Lo Pachos, Lo Yos. That's what the Mishnah has to tell us. Now, we actually have some ground to cover. So let me pause. Clarification is important. Is there anything that we can clarify over here from the Mishnah? Again, the permutations I know are a little technical, but we just went through the general principles. Anything we could clarify on that front?
I have a question.
Yes, Phyllis. Good to hear you. Welcome back.
Thanks. I'm sorry I'm late. Do we understand from this what we do when there is an Adar Sheni?
So we will have that discussion. There's a whole discussion. Is Adar Rishon the real Adar? Is Adar Sheni the real Adar? As all of you may know, if you're saying L'chaparas Pasha in your Musa for Rosh Chodesh, you might be aware, or just look at the calendar, that we, as Phyllis points out, we have two Adars this year. It's very fortuitous. We'll discuss this, God willing. The second Adar is really considered the primary Adar, and that's when we observe Purim. Now, there's discussion. What?
We we observe Zion Adar on the first Adar and Yahrzeit also, I think.
Yahrzeit, so Yahrzeit's like a whole machlokus, exactly, about, some observe the Yahrzeit on both Adars, some only on the second. I need to take out my my Gesher Echaim and see how he writes it all up, but there's actually multiple opinions. So the recommendation, I think, is to say Kaddish on both days if one can. Remind me, Phyllis, do you have a Yahrzeit during Adar?
No, but the Zion Adar dinner,
Moshe Rabbeinu.
is usually the first Adar.
All right, well, I guess we're ever saying Kaddish for Moshe Rabbeinu, we could worry about that.
Right, because for those things, there's no need to be close to Pesach. But for Purim itself, you want it as close to Pesach as possible, right?
Right. So we're going to see that very soon in the Gemara, and that's going to have a nafkami, as Toby points out. Nowadays, that we operate on a calendar, we basically need to start counting 30 days from Purim is Pesach. So that, it's important to have an Adar Sheni. So I know 30 days from Purim is Pesach. Otherwise, things get discombobulated. So very good point that you're making, Toby. And the Gemara actually will use that for another purpose. So let's get to the Gemara and you'll see how it's used. Not immediately, more toward the end. So just keep that in the back burner. Yes, Susan.
When do you observe somebody's birthday?
You want well, as they say, the only birthday mentioned in the Torah is whose?
Zion Adar, Moshe.
No, not Moshe. Birthday.
Paro.
Oh,
Paro,
Paro.
very good.
Paro.
Paro,
Yeah.
yeah.
So some say it's the only person who observed his birthday in the Torah was Paro. There's no real nafkamina halachically for when one has their birthday. You could choose whatever day you like, and you're always welcome to put that on Facebook or eat a cake on that day for halachic purposes.
For a friend.
Right? Or whenever they want. Whoever said that halacha dictates everything in your life. There you go. Okay. Let's start the Gemara. Megillah Nikris Biyud Aleph Minolan. So where do we know that the Megillah could be read all the way as early as the 11th? Okay, huge parenthetical. Open parenthetical, here we go. Minolan, what do you mean Minolan? Where do we know? What's the origin of us knowing that we can lane as early as the 11th for the villagers? As we're going to say later on, I think on Daf Dalet, if I'm not mistaken. Chachamim hekilu ala kfarim lios magdimin liyom haknisa deyishas sheisafku mayim atznachim shebekrachim. The Chachamim were lenient; they took it easy on the villagers, so the villagers would have an easy time providing provisions for the city folk. So that's why the Chachamim gave us the flexibility for the villagers to hear the Megillah read as early as the 11th. So we know already. The Chachamim told us. The rabbis told us. The same okay. A little bit of important background. Is the mitzvah of Megillah d'oraisa or d'Rabbanan? Is it biblical or is it rabbinical in origin? And it's not so clear. It might be something in between, actually. Unlike a standard d'Rabbanan, which, the rabbis, Muktzah is not a good example either because Muktzah is a minority opinion. But, chicken, mixing chicken with milk, considering a basar v'chal. Unlike a standard d'Rabbanan, Megillah is rooted in Ksuvim. It's different Kabbalah. So it doesn't have the same status as a d'oraisa, as a biblical mitzvah, but it might be something higher than just your regular Joe Isser d'Rabbanan, a mitzvah midrabbanan. Something to keep in mind. Nonetheless, it definitely was some form of rabbinic institution. It's definitely not in the Chamishe Chumshei Torah. It's definitely not in the good old Pentateuch. So it's clear to us that the rabbis instituted the days, and Heim Amru, the rabbis can decide that we can lane as early as the 11th. So what do you mean we know, and where do we know? Like, where's the pasuk that tells me that I can lane as early as the 11th? The rabbis made it up. The rabbis can make up whatever they want. It's their mitzvah. They can decide the parameters. No. So let's clarify what our question is, right? So we had a question on what our question was. Anan hachi kamrina. This is what we're saying. And you're going to learn a very important principle here. Michti kulu anshe knesses agdola tekninu. So let's see. All of this was instituted by the Anshe Knesses Agadola. Because if we thought the Anshe Knesses Agadola, so we're Anshe Knesses Agadola, we don't really know exactly who they are, but they're the men of the Great Assembly, an earlier rabbinic body. They instituted, if I'm not mistaken, Shmona Esrei as well. So we're talking about a very early rabbinic body, and what they institute has precedent. That's important. If we were to suppose that the Anshe Knesses Agadola, the men of the Great Assembly, only instituted, they said you can only lay it on the 14th and the 15th. Could the next generation of rabbis come along and uproot that which the earlier generation said and say, nah, we can be more cavalier. They said 14 and 15. You know what? 11, 12, and 13 is okay as well. No, that's not how halacha works. That's none. Ain based in Yochel Levatel, Divrei based in Chaveiro, King Gadol Bimenu Chacham Minyan. If there's an idea you walk away with today, ironically, what I want you to walk away with is not just an idea, it's not a Megillah idea per se, but it's one of the most important principles in halacha that you're going to hear, which is a beis din is not able to annul the words of an earlier beis din, an earlier rabbinic body, unless they are greater in wisdom and in numbers. Now, greater than in wisdom, well, if we assume that there's a diminution of generations, Yeridas Adoros, that each and every generation further from our Sinai is not as great as the earlier one, that basically means we're stuck and we can never uproot an earlier generation. And that's how we get stuck with a lot of D'Rabbanans that might not be as applicable today. What's it mean, dominion, greater in number? Maybe it means greater in rabbis on the court, but it could also mean how many students they have as well. So it's a little bit unclear what that refers to. But we'll elaborate on that, God willing, at the end if we have time. So point being is, it can't be a later generation that made this up. It has to be an earlier, it's Anshe Knesses Gadola, they're the ones who said that you could lane through Yud Aleph through Tesvav, always early as the 11th, because otherwise another generation would not be able to come later and say otherwise. Rather, what's the question? Heicha Remiza. We know it was an institution by Anshe Knesses Gadola. The question is, many times we have what's called an asmachta. I think that's what it's referring to here, where the rabbis, they will, there's a machlokus what asmachta really means, but I'll just give you one explanation. Oh, maybe two. So basically, Chazal, they would look in the Torah, and if they saw that the Torah implied something, but it wasn't a mitzvah per se, they read in that God was kind of giving them the permission, the option to institute certain takanos. The other idea might be that they just kind of, they hang their hat on certain psukim in the Torah, even though the takana is coming from them, it's not coming from the Torah. To help you remember it, to kind of give it more authority, they'll attribute it to a pasuk in the Torah. So the question is, Heicha Remisa, where do we see in the psukim, in the verses, in the Megillah, that it's appropriate to read the Megillah as early as the 11th? Here we go. There's going to be two approaches. They both agree, they just find different sources for it. Amar Sham bar Abba Rav Yochanan Amar Kra. It says in the Seches Megillah, it says in the Megillah, in the Sefer. L'kayim v'sinei apur ma'ela bizmanehem. It says that you shall establish, you shall uphold the days of Purim in their time. Zmanim harbe takmilahem. The fact that it uses this larger version of the word zman, of zmanehem, implies many zmanim, which means not just the 14th and the 15th that are actually written in the Megillah, but it means in addition to them, other days as well, which includes 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. You can't use that word to teach you additional days. We need that itself to teach me the 14th and the 15th. There's going to be a little bit of ping pong over here. Imkain, lema kra zman. Well, actually, maybe the pasuk is coming to indicate something. The fact it didn't say zman, but said my zmanehem. Why is it saying in their times? Zmanim tuva, to teach me many zmanim, not just the 14th and 15th, but additional zmanim in addition to the 14th and 15th. But we still need the word to teach me. Zmanehem might not be coming to teach me the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th, but maybe what it comes to tell me is that it's not at the 14th. I would have thought maybe the 14th and the 15th are both my options. Doesn't matter whether I live in a village or a walled city, but I can choose to hear it on the 14th or on the 15th. Why is it Zmanehem? To teach me that no, if I'm in a village or a regular city, it has to be the 14th. If I'm in a walled city, it must be the 15th. That's what we use the longer word Zmanehem for. We still don't have an indication that there are days in addition to the 14th and the 15th. Well, the pasuk could have said the word Zmanam. My Zmanehem. Why did it have to use an especially long word Zmanehem? Shmat mine kulhu. Rather, we can learn all three principles through this extraneously long word. Number one, the 14th and the 15th. Number two, the 14th and 15th are not, it's one or the other, depending on where you're located. Number three, the 11th through the 13th also are included. Ema zmanam tuva, zmanehem dumya dizmanam. Ma zmanam trey, af zmanehem trey. Ema treysar tleysar. Well, okay, I got it. Zmanehem indicates that we have days in addition to the 14th and 15th. But I would think the most you could add on is 2 additional days. It says 2 in the Megillah, 14th and 15th. So Zmanehem comes to teach me you can 2 additional days on top of the 14th and 15th. 2 in the Megillah, 2 that are being implied that are not written in the Megillah. So that would tell me the 12th and the 13th. Where do I get the 11th from? That's 3. The answer is because the 13th day is obvious to us, because the 13th day is actually when the fighting happened, when we defended ourselves. The 14th afterward is when we rested. It's noteworthy that we actually rest. We celebrate the day that we rested from battle. We don't celebrate the day that we did battle. So I'm sure there's some sort of drasha in there. So since the 13th day is obvious to me, what days were not obvious to me? The 11th and the 12th. And that's what the word Zmanehem comes to include. That way I learned the 11th and 12th. 13th is obvious because that's when we did war. As Rashi says on the next column, the Ikar Hanes Bohaya. That's when the primary miracle happened, on the 13th. So that's how I know all the days. Hey, if I'm adding on 2 additional days, why do I presume it to be the 11th through the 13th, 11 and 12? Maybe it should be the next 2 days, the 16th and the 17th. The answer is Lo Yavor Tziv, because it says Lo Yavor, you shouldn't go past the 15th. So what are 2 days close to the 14th and 15th? That's not past it. I would say that's the 11th and 12th, and the 13th we know, and the 14th and 15th are actually written in the Megillah. That's how we get 11 through 15. All you got to know from there is we have a source that tells us 11 through 15. That's the important takeaway. And we have another source, another suggestion for the same idea. Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Kara. We're now in the wide lines. It says, like those days that the Jews rested, Yamim. I would think it should say the word Yamim, the days. Ki yamin, what's it mean like those days? L'ravos yud alf yud beis. Ki yamin comes to teach me days like the 14th and 15th, which comes to include the 11th and the 12th. And then the same questions and answers. They have a tracer or tracer. Maybe those 2 days are the 12th and the 13th. Where do I get the 11th from? The 13th is self-evident to us because that's when the war happened. That's when the actual miracle happened. Of course, the 13th is already included. We don't need to be told that. So then what 2 days can I include? The next days I would think to include are the 11th and the 12th. Why not go further? 16 and 17 instead of 11 and 12? Lo Yavor, it says in the pasuk, Lo Yavor, you shouldn't go past it. And again, that's how we wind up with 11 through 15. Just instead of using the word Zmanehem, he derives from the word Kayamin. Now the Gemara asks, well, they both seem to reach the same conclusion, but they both necessitated deriving it from different words. Why couldn't they each agree to the other person's proposition? Rishon Nachmani Amar, Rishon Nachmani, my taima lo Amar bivis manehem. Why didn't he adopt the first opinion of Rashon Bar Abba? So Zmanei lo mashle. He's like, oh, come on. Zmanom, Zmanehem. Stop playing these games with me. You're reading too much into one word. Now, when do we say you're reading too much into one word when you're not? He's reading into Yamim and Kayamim. So, touche. But that's what he says. So lo mashbele, you're reading too much into it. That's why he doesn't use Zmanehem as his proof text. Rashon Bar Abba, my time a little more Kayamim. And Rashon Bar Abba, the first approach, why doesn't he learn from the words Kayamim like Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani? The answer is Amar Lachahu Ladoros Hudachsid. He actually does use the word Kayamim, but he used it to teach us that the mitzvah of reading wasn't just for that generation, but was for all ensuing generations. And that's how we all wound up with Megillah reading today. That's why we're still obligated. Okay, that ends that section. We have figured out why, in addition to the 14th and 15th, which are written explicitly in the Megillah, we also have 11, 12, and 13. The 13th, we know it's obvious because that's when the war happened. As Rashi puts it, to Iker Hanes Bohaya. That's when the primary miracle took place. Rather, either Kayamim or Mizmanehem teaches us to add on 2 additional days, and that is 11th and 12th, because we can't add on the 16th and 17th. We can't add on after 15. Why? Lo Yavor Ksiv, because it says, don't go any further, you shall not pass. So we wind up with 11 through 15. That's how they determined it. Let me pause for a moment. Do we have any questions?
Again, who says Lo Yavor? Where does that come from?
It is in the Pasuk. It's Megillah Esther Perek Tes Pasuk Chaf Zion. Smack in the middle of the Pasuk. Kiva v'kibul ha'yehudim aleim v'al zar v'al kol hanil b'maleihem v'lo ya'avor. Yosos me'shnei hayom ha'ela yosom v'zman v'chol shana v'shana.
Very clear.
Yep, right there in the Megillah. So, see, my good old Torah or Hashalim helped me out over here. You guys all know the joke of the Torah or Hashalim. I told you this a number of times already, right? Gloria's smiling. She remembers it. But I'll for the rest of you, for your benefit, I'll tell it to you. If you look on the side of your Gemara, if you have a more recent Gemara, you have something called the Torah or Hashalim, which is a really helpful tool because the Gemara cites psukim, assuming that you and I, we already memorized Tanakh already, we know everything. So it'll just like give me a few words out of a pasuk, and I have to figure out where the pasuk is written and what all the other words are. The Torah Hashalim did us a favor, and it lines up all the psukim from Tanakh that are referenced to the Gemara on the side in the margin. So there's this good joke about yeshiva bachrim, like myself, who are notoriously known for not learning enough Nach, enough Nevi'im Ksubim. And the joke goes that a yeshiva bacher goes over to this chavrusa, and he's like, you wouldn't believe it. I was looking through the Beis Medrash, and I uncovered this dusty book, and it's like a compilation of all the Torah Hashalims and Shas. Wow. His Chavrus asks him, what's it called? It looks like it's called a Tanakh. You'll get, think about it. You'll get it. Okay. Yeah, you're just like so disturbed by the premise of the joke that you don't even want to laugh at it. I understand. Okay.
Right.
We need to bring Rabbi Helfgott again here to give us some mussar about learning Tanakh. All right, but actually that's the opinion of I think Rabbi Tam in Tosfos, or is it Rashbam? I think Rabbi Tam. Anyway, in the Bali Tosos, that learning Gemara you actually get Tanakh in, because look at the side of your Gemara at all the psukim that are quoted. So you wind up learning Tanakh by learning Gemara. Okay.
Okay.
Here we go. Final section of the Gemara for tonight. Everything until this point was working off the Mishnah. The opinion in the Mishnah, Tana in the Mishnah, assumes that it's okay to read on the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th for the villagers, and not just the 14th and the 15th. However, this apparently was a very liberal opinion. They had their politics back then also. There were some who held, no, it says in Megillah 14th and 15th. We don't need your new Narishkeit to tell us to lane on other days, right? This is orthodoxy. This is halacha. We're not changing it. So, what's going on over here? Amar Rav Yochanan. Zo divrei Rabbi Akiva si mitzah. The darsh zman zmanam zmanehem. Everything until this point, our Mishnah is in the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who has that degree of flexibility for the villagers. But what's the position of the Chachamim? We only read on the 14th and the 15th. End of discussion. Right? They were like the Havdalahs, like the carrots. They look at the Tanakh, it says 14th and 15th. It didn't mention any other days. So you read on the 14th and the 15th. End of discussion. Meisvei. However, it would seem that we have a contradictory understandings of what the Chachamim held. You see, Rabbi Yochanan's conception. Oh yes, Toby. Hello.
No, wait, I couldn't hear you. Like you froze
did I
for a
lose you
minute.
guys? I think I may have lost you guys in general. Where did I get cut off? Yeah, let me start from the beginning. Let me just start from the beginning. It's only one line back. So Amar Rav Yochanan, Zo Divri Rabbi Kiva Sasim Sa Dar Zman Zman Zmanehem. Our Mishnah is not a consensus. It's not a consensus opinion. Well, maybe it's a consensus opinion, but it's definitely not the only opinion. Rabbi Akiva held that we have a degree of flexibility for villagers that they can lay on the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. But the Chachamim hold that if it says the 14th and 15th in the Megillah, that's all you can read on. Don't play around with the text. Don't start adding on new days. Only the 14th and the 15th. Meisvei. But is that really what the Chachamim held? Rabbi Yochanan thinks the Chachamim always held 14th, 15th, no matter where it was, villagers in any time. End of discussion. Meisvei, but we have a contradiction. Rabbi Yehuda, Amasai, when were the Chachamim, when are we lenient? When are we flexible to allow reading on the 11th through the 13th? When the calendar was determined based on sightings of the moon when we were in Eretz Yisrael. Toby, this is the point you brought up. Nowadays, when we just have a set calendar and we check the date, we have to read in its proper time. Why can we not be flexible to read the Megillah on the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th? Because Pesach is a month after Purim. And if you're laning on the 11th, the 12th, or the 13th, and you're going to count 30 days from then, and you're not going to observe, you're going to observe Pesach too early, and then when Pesach actually comes, you're going to wind up eating chametz before it's permissible. So it could lead to cataclysmic consequences. Therefore, nowadays, where we know 30 days after Purim, that's when Pesach occurs. Because we don't do Rosh Chodesh based on sight. It's a fixed 30 days from Purim. Rabbi Yehuda, Aliba Okay, fine. So Rabbi Yehuda Aliva Daman. What's this statement made in accordance with? Aliva Akiva, Afi was manazeh. Sorry. If we say he's in accordance with Rabbi Akiva, Afi was manazeh, Isa, Lahai Takanta. Rabbi Akiva would say, even nowadays, we permit you to lane as early as the 11th. Rabbi Yehuda must be coming to elucidate the position of the Rabbanan, of the Chachamim. But it would seem that Rabbi Yehuda says that at least back in the good old days, when we were in Eretz Yisrael and the dates were determined based on sight, based on witnesses seeing the moon, at least then the Chachamim allowed reading on the 11th through the 13th for villagers. Tiyufta to Rabbi Yochanan Tiyufta. So Rabbi Yehuda is a Tana, right? It's good to go over some important principles here for learning Gemara. The Tanaim are in the Mishnah. They are earlier than the Amoraim, which is the commentary, the Gemara. So what we just cited is Rabbi Yehuda, which is a Tana. And Rabbi Yehuda seems to be explaining the position of the Rabbanan, that the Rabbanan actually had a degree of flexibility back when we were in Eretz Yisrael, and we determined the beginning of the month based on the sight of the moon, not based on the fixed calendar. However, Rabbi Yochanan explained that the Chachamim had absolutely no flexibility. Even when we were in Eretz Yisrael, we always only permitted reading on the 14th and 15th. We did not permit people ever to read on the 11th through the 13th. So we have a contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan cannot disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is like the principle we just learned tonight. You can't disagree with precedent. And Rabbi Yehuda established precedent in the Chachamim's position. So we got a big issue. We say, Tiyufta Rabbi Yochanan Tiyufta, Rabbi Yochanan, who conceives of the Rabbanan as this hardline position, never bending, never willing to allow any laning on the 11th through the 13th, it seems incorrect. That's one way this conversation went down. However, we have an Ika de Amri. It's going to sound very similar to what we just read. There's another version of how this conversation took place. A lot of same principles you're going to hear right now. I mean, in general, just for those who are learning Gemara, this is more your first rodeo. In Ika de Amri, there are those who say, that's a translation, is that you'll find in the Gemara sometimes there's one version. I mean, think about it. I was just contacted by Meg Caron that we lost the notes from one of our board meetings, and she was trying to collect and reconstruct how the conversation went. So, if it could happen at a shul board meeting, apparently it could happen back in Talmud times before they had the cloud and Google Drive and things to save things on. So there are different versions of how certain conversations went down. The stenographer's computer broke down after a board meeting. So we have two versions of how the conversation went down. That what we just read was the first one. Now we're going to read the second one. Ikan Amri. Amar Rav Yochanan. Zodir Akiva Simsa. This sounds familiar so far. Our mission to the course of Akiva. Aval Chachamim Amru Bisman Azeh. Homistagaba in Korsa El Bismana. But the Chachamim, they hold, now things fit nicely. The Chachamim aren't a hardline position, but rather the Chachamim hold, like we read before, and we'll repeat now, that only nowadays there's no flexibility, because that's be 30 days until Pesach. But back in the day, when there was a declaration of the Chodesh based on sight of the moon, there was flexibility. Even the Chachamim agreed. Just Rabbi Akiva holds, even nowadays, the Chachamim say only flexible back in the days of yore. Tani Nami Hachi, and we have a brisa that supports this. Sound familiar? On Rabbi Yehuda, Amosai Bisman Shasham Kisik Nabi Soshana Basan, Avazman Azel Bistagaba in Korsel Bismana. But now, right? So basically, what we just said, that was back in the good old days. We had flexibility. Nowadays, only the 14th and 15th is when the Megillah is read. Very good. End of that section. One last little tidbit over here. Rav Ashi Kashle's Rehuda. Rav Ashi seems to identify a contradiction within Rabbi Yehuda. So you remember Rabbi Yehuda was explaining the position of the Chachamim in general, which is back in the day we were flexible. Nowadays, since we have a fixed calendar, we have to lane on the 14th or 15th so people know when Pesach is. However, Rabbi Yehuda seems to contradict himself, and therefore, turning the page, congratulations, we all just learned our first Avodah Megillah. Umukim la lebraisa krav Yosi bar Yehuda. And therefore, what does he do? Because there's going to be a contradiction that we'll explore in a moment between two statements of Rabbi Yehuda. What does he do? He says one of these statements is not Rabbi Yehuda, but is a different guy named Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi, the son of Yehuda. So, okay, what's the contradiction that forced him to do this? Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold that Bismana Zed, that nowadays we can't read it except on the 14th and the 15th? Or a Minhi? We have a contradiction here from a Mishnah. Amar Yehuda. All right, it's found on, it'll be on Daf Dalam and Base through Ham and Aleph, coming up in a few weeks. Amar Yehuda. But I guess we get a preview right now for those of us who are eager to see it. Amar Yehuda, Emasai Makom Sheknas B'Shem Chamishi. When do they read? When they read on the 11th through the 13th, when they go in on Mondays and Thursdays, in Kordosa Ella Bismana. Oh, sorry, did I just skip a line? All right, Huda. Emasai Makom Sheknas B'Shem Chamishi. Aval Makom She'enechnas B'Shem Chamishi. In Kordosa Ella Bismana. But on the places that don't go to the cities on Mondays and Thursdays, meaning non-villagers, they have to read on the 14th and 15th. What do we see from the statement? The implication there is he doesn't put any qualifications. Right? He says even nowadays, villagers can read on the 11th through the 13th. This clearly contradicts Rabbi Yehuda. It says nowadays they cannot read on 11th through 13th, only on the 14th and 15th. Therefore, therefore, he was forced to attribute the earlier brisa not to Rabbi Yehuda, but to a different person, Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Now, the Gemara, just as a parenthetical, says, usually when you have a contradiction between, within a particular individual statement, what we could do is say, well, maybe there were two versions of what that rabbi said. Why did he? It's a little bit more extreme to suggest that it's a different person entirely. So be sure the Kashlei to Rabbi Yehuda, what? Because of this one contradiction, you have to jump to the conclusion of saying that it's a different author altogether. Well, actually, what Rav Ashi heard was some guys were saying that the author was Rabbi Yehuda. Some were saying the author of the brisa was Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, and once he saw there was a contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda's statements, Amar Mantani like Rabbi Yehuda lav dafka, Mantani like Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda dafka, must mean that it was actually Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. That way, we don't have a contradiction within the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, deep breath, everyone. That was very technical. I admit it. And for those who are joining us for the first time, I do not want you to get scared away. This was a more technical Gemara. There will be Gemaras that we'll learn that are far less technical than this, and you don't have to, have your head spinning by the end of it. But as I said, it seems that the authors of the Gemara want to separate the men from the boys, or the women from the girls. See, there we go. We're very pro equality and egalitarianism. We're mono-orthodox, right? So I hope we made it through and we're not completely traumatized. One interesting idea I wanted to circle back to in our last few minutes, and usually we don't go for an hour, by the way. I think just because we're introducing the Masechta for the first time, we spent a little extra time. We definitely never exceed an hour, so hold me to that. A question that I want to raise for you is, we learned a very important principle, which if there's one thing you remember, I want you to walk away remembering this. We quoted the Mishnah elsewhere that says, a later court cannot overrule, it cannot revoke the ruling of an earlier court unless it's greater in wisdom and in number. Let me ask you a question. There's a mitzvah to blow shofar, right? On Rosh Hashanah. When Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, why don't we blow the shofar?
You might have to carry it.
Very good, Phyllis. Similar to the issue of Megillah. You might carry through Rosh Hashanah. But you see, that was a rabbinical institution. The rabbis came along and said, I know that the Torah mandates for us to blow the shofar and listen to the shofar today, but we're going to tell you not to do it today because we're concerned you're going to carry it on Shabbos through a place without an Eruv, through Rosh Hashanah.
Did they blow
Now,
it in the?
This comes from a principle which is called actually the rabbis have a right to literally, we'll explain what this means, uproot a mitzvah in the Torah and tell you passively not to perform it. So let me ask you a question, Rav Elchanan Wasserman asks and others ask. If the rabbis had the power to tell you not to follow a mitzvah in the Torah, to refrain from doing it, why don't Kal v'chomer, they should be able to overrule an earlier court. If I could overrule a mitzvah in the Torah and tell you not to do it, Kal v'chomer, I should be able to overrule a statement made by men, by chachamim, by great rabbis, greater than myself, but obviously not greater than the Torah. So that's the question Rav Elchanan and others asked. Let me rapidly give you a few answers, and maybe we could chew on it and we could circle back next time to it. One answer is that this is how one answer given is that the dynamic here, and how we understand it, is that there's a mitzvah in the Torah and there's a mitzvah to listen to the rabbis. It's called lo sasor. There's an actual mitzvah that tells us to listen to the rabbis. So when I have a mitzvah in the Torah and a mitzvah to listen to the rabbis, and they're in contradiction with each other, we say, Shev al Tasa, better not to do the mitzvah in the Torah than violate lo sasor. And that's actually what's happening. The rabbis don't have the power, God forbid, to erase a mitzvah in the Torah. It's just when I have competing mitzvahs of what shofar and listening to the rabbis, it's able to neutralize. And I say, you know what? I'm not even getting involved. Shev al Tasa. Another idea, and we'll say the name Sfas Emes for another time. Sfas Emes basically says that the Torah, the rabbis know the reasons behind the Torah. So the rabbis have the right. I guess we're not privy to. We might start doing Sefer Chinuch on Sunday mornings after we're done with the Torah. So keep your ears out open for that. But the rabbis, at least, they know the reasons for the mitzvahs in the Torah, so they can tell you when not to do it. But they might not know the reasoning of an earlier Beis Din. So they have no right to overrule an earlier Beis Din because they might not know the rationales and considerations that they had when they instituted something.
Doesn't this all come under a Su Siag Torah?
Very good, Phyllis. And then the second point that's made, his name is Turi Evan. He says, when do rabbis have the power to do this? When they're creating a siyag, when they're trying to protect you. Why are they allowed to tell you not to do a mitzvah in the Torah? To prevent you from violating an isser in the Torah. It's not that the rabbis overrule the Torah, God forbid, but it's that they want to ensure that you don't, God forbid, violate the Torah. So they say better to passively not fulfill a positive mitzvah than to, God forbid, likely come into the situation where you'll be violating an isser of the Torah, let's say carrying. So that's when we apply that principle. Okay, a few approaches. We can elaborate on this next time, but I don't want to exceed my 1 hour. The share is officially done. We just hit 8 o'clock. We're done. But I will stay on if there are any additional questions. Thank you all for joining. I know it's a difficult first step. They say all starts are difficult, but I hope to continue, God willing, next week. And hopefully, if we finish this fast enough, Mitchell Bell will make us another Suda. So maybe we should pick up the pace. I want another breakfast.
Everybody. Shabbat Shalom.
Good Shabbos. Zadie, you want to say something?
Thank you.
Yeah. Moshe?
Yes.
Okay. I had a thought. You were discussing the concern of measuring when we're going to have Pesach, if we're landing on the 11th, 12th, or 13th. But we know when the battle took place, we know when it ended. And we measure from there, we don't measure from when we land.
Sorry, I'm not sure I followed the question.
Well, you expressed a concern that some people would start Pesach early because they landed on the Megillah on the 11th, 12th, or 13th, so would come they would start Pesach too early. But
Yeah.
what I'm saying is you measure from when the actual battle ended and we celebrated a victory. And not from when we actually lay the Megillah.
Right. So yeah. Oh,
So that concern doesn't exist of starting early.
you're saying it's more a concern for the 11th and 12th than for the 13th?
Yeah, I'm saying if we lay in the 11th, 12th, or 13th,
Right.
doesn't affect when Pesach starts.
Doesn't affect
We're just
it,
laying
but-
early because of the convenience of the
Oh.
people living out in the.
Right.
in
But
the
the issue
country.
is that those individuals who heard the Megillah, they don't have a calendar at home that was sent out by their shul. So they're like, oh, when did I hear Megillah? Let's count 30 days. Now is Pesach. That's really the concern that's going to happen.
But wouldn't they know when the 14th and the 15th are?
You'd be surprised. Not everyone really pays attention to their calendars and to their luach that closely. Certainly, like a small little village where maybe they don't have even a luach sent over there. They don't know what's going on. All right, but let's think about that more. All right, Ashikoach, everyone. Thanks so much for joining and wishing you all a good Shabbos.
Shabbat Shalom.